really is a terrific way of catching fish. You can rig and fish these soft plastics in lots of different ways. In today's video I really want to show you the right way to do it, avoid some common mistakes that we see a lot, the conditions you need to be able to catch bass, and I want to finally nail down what we need to do with a rod and reel to make sure that these plastic lures have the best action underwater, whether you're going to be using weighted shads, fishing unweighted, and the benefits that that might have. You can travel super light, it's just you, a rod, handful of lures, a little bit of line, and off you go. Catch fish. No messy bait on your hands or anything like that. We consider if it's worth spending a little bit more to get some better quality soft plastics. I'm going to list all the hooks that you need as well. These come with different types of hooks, so we're going to dig a bit deeper into weedless. The line that you use, I suggest, should be braid. The specific make that I use is this RAPAL KNOT. Try and go as light as possible. Bass are quite finicky at times and they will see bigger braid, they'd possibly even see bigger fluorocarbon as well. It's 20-pound braid, so it's quite strong. You could actually go right the way down to 15-pound braid. Pay a little bit more to get it that little bit thinner as well, but I think this is a really good balance. I'll leave a link for these underneath, so if you do want them, I can definitely say this is a good braid for the money. I really mix up the fluorocarbon in terms of braids. I mean, we've got Suffolks today, but basically if you've got 18, 20-pound braid, 18, 20-pound fluorocarbon as well. Fish as light as possible. If I can get away with it, I'd love to use 6-pound line. Where I fish has got a lot of big boulders, so what I tend to do is have a really long amount of fluorocarbon on my line. 14 foot even from the shore, so it's wrapped round the reel, goes up the rod, 14 foot of that. The braided line goes over the rocks, it tends to wear away. Fluorocarbon is that little bit stronger. Another reason you might want to use fluorocarbon is because it is invisible to the bass. Now, I don't know, is it invisible to the bass? It is one of the reasons that they try and sell it. Not sure about that, but I do know that it's certainly harder wearing than the braid, so a good length of fluorocarbon line. I've spoken to some commercial bass anglers and they tell me one of the things they always do is have a good length of fluorocarbon. So I just want to show you how easy it is to do this F.G knot. It is the best knot, I think, for joining this sort of thickness of line together, the fluorocarbon and the braid. You need a little bit of tension in the braid, and you can get that by running it off the rod tip down to your little finger. All you need to do is lay the fluorocarbon on top like that, and you're going to go under or round that way and then round that way, and just keep going under. You've almost formed a V there. This bit's running to your finger, that bit's running to the rod tip. And I would go, what we got, and keep that nice and tight. I'd almost add some tension using this index finger of what is my left hand. Depends if you're right or left-handed. And then just keep going like that, and you just got to keep tension, and keeping tension here, tension there, and that'll give you a nice little knot. Just keep going. There you go. And that is all it is really, and then you're just tying 2 overhand knots and bite down with this running end of the braid like that. That's almost good enough. You can just pinch the loops across. By the time you do a second overhand knot, and then so you're basically doing that V, keeping everything tight, and then obviously you're just trimming that. Don't trim it too close. You see the mullet here, look. Hang on. You see those? So if you're changing lures regularly, I recommend these mini link quick change clips. These are ones from Breakaway, super strong, and they're tiny as well, 25-pound test. You will not have a problem with those. I think sometimes though the soft lures don't fish as well with these, and I'd recommend using a RAPAL knot, and only use those if you're going to be changing lures quite a lot. So the RAPAL knot's the simplest and easiest one to do. First thing you do is take your fluorocarbon, do an overhand knot. We all know how to do those. You want to leave about 3 inches of the running end, and then working left to right here, that just goes through that eye and then goes back through the loop like that. So you've got a second loop, hold that, and then all I do, 1, 2, 3, 4 turns, keeping everything tight if you can, and then you're going to go back through that little loop that you made initially, and then pinch that and then just bite down on that, and that should, I might have to pull that tail bit a bit. That is an excellent knot, that. That'll make that look as natural as possible in the water. Always remember to moisten it and then just trim the tag in there. So even though the bass are quite opportunistic feeders, meaning they'll pretty much eat anything, I find this quite interesting. Here we've got lots of white bait that have washed up, and you know that these have been chased onto the beach by mackerel and in turn by bass. What we're trying to do is try and replicate what the bass are actually feeding on. Now this little fish here came out of that big mouth of the bass, so you can see why the bass has wanted that lure if that's what it's feeding on. That'll have been on the same tide, that. Wow. It's just copying basically what the bass are expecting to see. So these are weighted shads. They've got the weighted heads on there. That's made out of a lead alternative. We'll look a bit closer later, but they all have these different tails which affects the action. Not as much as you'd think looking at our tests, but we'll come on to that. Some have weedless hooks like this heart one. Attaches on there, and it's got that little bend in it, little bend in the shank, and then it wraps around back into the lure. Now these lures have a handy little cut section there, plus a hole. Sometimes they'll have a hole for the hook point to go through, and then the hook comes back inside to the lure, and I tend to just put it into there. Now it doesn't really matter of the brand, it's a similar system used on a few. There are differences in price and quality. So all of these are good enough and will catch fish. So I refer to these as weighted shads really. They've got a soft body and a weighted head. You can see most of these have got an eye on them, and then they've got a particular type of tail. Now the tail does affect the action, but not that much, to be honest. I mean, Savage Gear talk about whether it's a pin tail or a paddle tail. We've done some tests underwater. It doesn't really make that much difference, I don't think. The important thing is whether the bass notice a difference. You've got these two here. This is a black minnow 120 and a Konichi bullet head. £14 on a couple of these black minnows, or £7 on these Konichi ones. Just get a few to start off, and I'm going to show you how to use them. These are what I think of as weighted shads. It's interesting to see the difference actually between something that costs 15 quid for two and something that costs about 7 quid for two. These are the Konichi bullet heads, these ones, and that's the black minnow. Not too much difference there in the heads. So underwater you can see why it could look like a wounded bait fish, one maybe that's been pushed out the shoal, acting a bit strange. And I'm having to do quite a lot with the rod tip just to keep that black minnow mid-water here, and you see it sort of comes across like little taps Ideally this would be moving nice and straight through the water, so you don't have to thrash the lure. I see a lot of people retrieving really fast. You can do that at times, but ideally you'd want to be going the same sort of speed that a bass would encounter a bait fish moving. And we'll take a look in part 2 at more of these lures underwater. We're using these little lemon shads from Drift here, just showing you that you can bounce the lure across the bottom as well. Nice and slow. Quite a good little tactic actually for early season when the bass are a little bit more lethargic, more sort of head down early season up till about June and July. I find one of the weaker lures, these storm shad ones, they're actually a really good lure, but they do have a little bit of a weak point here, which is this pin mechanism. It's okay, but if you hit a rock or two with those, and then you tend to find that that can bust off, which is a shame because actually there's a really good action on those. They cast well, and they've got really good quality hooks as well, probably one of the best quality hooks. Just need to sort that out, I think, in terms of reliability. You can actually use these simple jig heads as well. That's got the weight in there. This is just like a 5 gram. I've used a black minnow rubber on there. The problem is a lot of the time with these is you get snagged, so the weedless version will get you out of the snags. Fishing over clear ground, and as I say, it's quite a light lure anyway. Something like this, you're bordering at LRF or light rock fishing. That's another option as well. You can get these cheaper jig heads here, size 1/0 hooks, 2/0 hooks, 3/0 hooks, different weights. It's worth getting a few of those, just a cheaper alternative really. Sidewinder Bass stick here. You see how it's nice and horizontal in the water. That's kind of what we're aiming for. That sort of action, particularly at night, because that's how the bait fish sort of drift about really. If you look at the lure there, you can see it's dark on the underside, so in effect I've turned this round. It highlights the lure more against its surroundings. Yes, it's a little bit unnatural, but you can get good results from actually turning the lure upside down, particularly on soft plastics. Now what this is, we actually ran a little poll on our Instagram. And that is actually a little rattle. So you can put these little rattles into soft plastics. They just push into the soft plastic itself, and it has a clicking sound. Now whether this works or not, I think it does. Yeah, I think it does actually, because bass will home in on something like a prawn that clicks over a shrimp that doesn't so much, and I'm sure that they use these sounds to locate the fish, so could be something you use. Now the salt in this lure here, this is an X-slayer, which means it's heavier to cast, and it also has some sort of smell addition into it. These Savage Gear gravity sticks have got different types of tails on them. You can rig them slightly differently as well. That one's just like a normal clean hooked one. That one there's got the weight on the belly, pintail, but you can also add weights to them at various points across the body, and this one has even got a little rattle in there, if I remember. The tails on there, this is made by Savage Gear. It's not as silicone-y, I suppose, as things like the Do Live stick, but a chunky enough weight. And I just want to show you that these can still be cast without any weight there on the hook. This is a Savage Gear hook, this one, and they give you quite a long pin, so you can accurately place that into the middle of the lure. As it works like a bit like a gauge, and always screw fitting straight and twist the actual lure, and you want to try and twist the lure all the way across the lure rather than just there, because otherwise it will twist too much. So now I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but there's a little loop there, and then this hook and the eye of the hook needs to move on that as it comes onto hook onto the lure, like that. Now if you've got this section here twisted too much, it tends to send the hook up into the other eye. So make sure that is at right angles. These Savage Gear ones here, they do give them different names. So you've got like a pintail and a paddle tail. I don't think it makes that much difference. A bass would have to be really finicky to see the difference between the two. But by all means try them. The action you need from those sticks is very minimal when you haven't got a good flow of water. Sometimes I'm just feeling it with my left hand like fly fishing. And then it always depends on how strong the tide is. But little flicks, just stay in contact with it. You do as little as possible really. I'm going to take a deeper look into that in the next episode. But look at these SLUGGOs underwater. You can see here all I'm doing is adding a little flick, lifting up the lure using the rod tip. You can get them swimming along the surface, or once they've sunk down, just bringing them up again. Keep them moving and try and remember what you were doing when that enticed that bass to take. I do like watching this footage underwater. You get a real appreciation of what you're doing with the rod tip. So if you can, always have a little practice in clear water to see the difference. Remember, this is an unweighted lure, and actually while I was doing this it did have a little follow from a bass. You can't quite see it on this video unfortunately, but a bass about twice the length of this lure came and had a little look at one point. So it is the good time of the year to start lure fishing for bass. You see here, just staying in contact with it. If you look closely there, you can see it has got a little weight on the shank of the hook, which will aid the casting. You don't always need it though. So little flicks. You should be able to feel what the lure does. So this is the black minnow. We're going to use a large version. Just want to quickly show you how to rig these. You've got the weighted head there with the link attached, and these do come with a couple of soft plastics that go with them, and there's a hole there the hook point's going to go through. So open up their hooks, these big wide gape hooks with an offset shank, holding the link that way up and the hook point down. You're simply going to go in that way so that it turns the hook point up. The soft plastic bit doesn't have any gaps in it there. This same applies for all of these soft plastics that have a similar system. Holding it at a right angle, we're going to go in with the soft plastic at that point there, and it's going to end up on that straight part. So you push it in and then over like that. That'll give you enough space then to get your hook in. That's what we looked at a little bit earlier. And then just push that soft plastic twist into place. And then it should open up for the hook to go through. And these fish actually have got a very different sort of soft plastic. You'll get used to the feel with them. A little bit too big from the shore, that one. Now similarly with these, this is a SLUG-GO. I like these 9-inch SLUG-GOs, and actually while we were filming it was the only lure that had a little follow from a bass. So I've got a lot of faith in these. Similar sort of hook there, you can see the hook still got that offset shank. Nice big eye on these ones. I'll leave a list of these as well underneath where you can get the right hooks. These are Mystic heavy duty wide gap ones, 7.0, huge great hooks. That's all you need. You see it's got an offset hook on there. I like the offset hooks. So you're going to measure how far to put in that hook by using the thumb as a gauge, and then just leave your thumb there while you put the hook point in, nice and straight, exactly through the middle. It's a really good time to be accurate. This, that's going to go through all the way to the level of your thumb. Then you start turning it in. It should, because of all that sort of silicone-y bit, should just slide down the hook really well. And you get to that point there, you're going to turn the hook. So holding the lure so it doesn't break apart. It shouldn't break apart. You're just going to turn it in. The eye of the hook just sits slightly outside the lure, like that. That's obviously where your line's going to go, and you're pretty much there. The only thing you need to do, again, measure with your thumb. Where there's a bend in the gape there is where it's going to come through the bit of soft plastic. You have to squeeze the lure up, push it exactly through the middle, bearing in mind this is an offset hook as well, so to come through the middle of the lure when it comes up the top. And that is pretty much it. Only thing you might want to do, you can fish with it like that, or you can just move the hook down and then tuck it inside the plastic if you want. These are little stick or worm baits. Exactly the same sort of principle with these. Still use the screw lock, still use these screw fitting ones. The width of the screw needs to be a little bit thinner on these, but you can see that's the end of the lure, and similar to how we were doing earlier, always keep the screw bit nice and straight and hold the lure, twist the lure actually onto the screw exactly in the middle. These don't have the pin that the Savage Gear one has. As we were saying earlier, you need to make sure that that hook is free to move on the other little eye, and obviously you're attaching your line to the hook itself, not that little screw fitting. You can get away with it on these if you're not perfectly accurate, but I do like to be dead straight. Look at that, perfect. And then just tuck it inside that rubber, because again, as we've said over and over, a bass will hit that lure really hard. Normally the hook shank goes in about the middle of the lure just to create that balance. However, with these smaller worm stick type baits, the action is provided a lot by that sort of waggly tail, so it doesn't matter so much. These are actually 4.0 hooks on here, but do not worry about doing bigger hooks. So what we see with surface colours is very different to what fish would see underwater as the water gets deeper. But the water absorbs different colours of light in varying amounts. And the colour that's absorbed the most is red. So when you look at this lure coming down, as that drops lower and lower, you see less and less red. But it looks dull or even black because the red light is absorbed once it reaches the fish's eyes. As we go from red to shorter wavelengths like the orange, yellow, green, blue and violet, each colour is absorbed less. Blue is absorbed the least, so it travels the furthest underwater. The clarity of the water also matters. Clear water allows light to travel further so we can see colours better. Now take a look at these three lures here in front of us, three slightly different blues, or are they? So those three lures are actually exactly the same colour, believe it or not, and all I'm doing there is changing the background, and it makes it look like the lures themselves are changing colour. when you've got big soft plastic like this SLUG-GO 9-inch, I think nothing of a big 5/0 twist lock hook. This is the twist in here, and you put these twist hooks into the top of the lure. They've got a really wide gape, and they actually add a little bit of weight to the lure. Now you can add shank weights on here. In the past I've used electrical wire around the shank as well, but you can buy them weighted as well, just to give that extra bit of weight, and they will drop through the water. The lure will drop through the water that little bit quicker. So you can actually see they produce, some of the lure manufacturers produce a little hole for the hook to go in, and then on the other side there's a recess as well. It sort of helps things along really, but as I say, when a bass hits that, they hit it so hard you can actually tuck the hook point into the plastic. When you're fishing these, they need to be nice and straight in the water, but if you just mishook this, maybe squeeze a bit on, I mean that's pretty extreme, and that will not have a good action. There's a Savage Gear one with the link mechanism on it. It's got a weighted head and it's got that big sort of paddle tail on there, so you'll see what that looks like as well. This one has got a little stick that you actually put through the eye that comes out of the weight there as well, so that's a little addition that you can get with those Savage Gear ones. Yeah, well, I mean it's not world changing, but it's probably worth an extra point for these lures. So as for casting, a simple overhead flick like this, you just want to set up the reel so you pull some line off, hold that against the rod. You can bring it right into the reel foot if you want. Don't forget to flip the bail arm over. Various ways you can cast, but to start off with, to get a good distance and a nice accurate cast, straight back behind you, release it just as it comes over your head, and a lot of it's to do with feel. And you can even do casual little casts like that as well. So I hope you'll join us for part 2 of this series. Should be out very soon, where we'll be looking at some lures underwater, where we'll be taking a look at some alternative soft plastics as well.